Mara did not look back when she left. She did not pause at the door, did not take one last look at the long stone hallway, did not let herself feel the weight of what she was walking away from. She simply moved, fast, quiet. With her daughter pressed against her chest and a single bag over her shoulder, she slipped out into the cold night like a shadow, and she did not stop walking until the mountains behind her were nothing but a dark shape against the sky. That was 5 years ago. Now she lived in a town called Greyport, tucked along the edge of a gray sea that matched its name. The streets were narrow and uneven. The houses were small and old. The people who lived there were the kind who minded their own business, and that suited Mara perfectly. She had chosen Greyport for that exact reason. Nobody here asked questions they did not need answers to. Nobody looked too long. Nobody cared where you came from, as long as you paid your rent on time and did not cause trouble. Mara paid her rent on time. She never caused trouble. She worked at a bakery on the corner of Callow Street and Fern Road, a little shop called Dorset's that smelled of warm bread and sugar from the moment you pushed open the door. The owner, an older woman named Edna, had hired Mara without much fuss. She had needed someone early, someone reliable, someone who did not call in sick every other week. Mara had been all three from the first day. She came in before the sun came up, mixed the dough, shaped the loaves, and by the time the first customers arrived at 7, everything was already behind the glass counter looking exactly as it should. She had a system. She liked systems. They kept her mind busy. A busy mind did not wander to places it had no business going. She had also changed her name, not dramatically, not in a way that required documents she did not have, but in the small, quiet way that people do when they want to become someone new. She had been Elena Vale, now she was Mara Ellis. Mara felt more honest anyway. Elena was the name that had belonged to a different woman, a woman who had believed in things that turned out not to be true. Mara was the woman who had survived finding that out. Her daughter's name was Lena. Just Lena, no last name on her school forms, which Edna had helped her sort out with a tired shrug, and the words, "Half the kids in this town don't have a proper last name on their forms. The school doesn't chase it." Lena was 5 now, small for her age but startlingly alert. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's eyes, which was a detail Mara tried very hard not to think about. Lena's eyes were a shade of amber that shifted in certain light. Most people assumed they were just an unusual color. Mara knew better, but she said nothing. Their life in Greyport was not exciting. That was the point. Mara woke at 4 in the morning, dressed in the dark, walked 12 minutes to the bakery, worked until noon, collected Lena from the small daycare 2 streets over, came home, made dinner, read to her daughter until she fell asleep, and then sat in the kitchen alone for an hour before she went to bed herself. She did this every day. She did not vary the routine unless she had to. Routine was armor. Routine was the closest thing to safety she had found. She had one photograph. Just one. She kept it inside the back cover of a cookbook she never cooked from. A thick book about French pastry that she had bought at a charity sale for 20 pence. The photograph was small and worn at the edges from being handled too much in the first 2 years, and then not at all in the 3 after that. She had not looked at it in a very long time. She knew exactly where it was. The town itself was the kind of place that seemed to exist slightly outside the rest of the world. News arrived slowly. Strangers passing through rarely stayed. The sea was close enough to hear from most streets, and on windy nights it sounded like something alive and restless out there in the dark. Lena loved the sound of it. She would stand at their small bedroom window on those nights and listen with her head tilted, the way animals do when they hear something humans cannot. Mara would watch her and feel something clench in her chest. There were things about Lena that she was going to have to explain one day. She had been putting that day off for as long as she could. She told herself she would know when the time was right. She told herself Lena was still too young. But she knew, in the honest part of herself that she kept very quiet, that she was not waiting for the right time. She was waiting because she was afraid. Lena had fallen down the front steps of the bakery when she was 3. A bad fall, the kind that should have drawn blood and bruises. Edna had rushed over in a panic, but by the time they reached Lena, there was nothing. No mark, no cut. Just the child sitting up on the pavement looking mildly surprised and already trying to stand again. Edna had called it lucky and crossed herself. Mara had taken Lena's hands in both of hers and turned them over slowly, checking every finger, her face calm and her heart going very fast. There were other small things. A glass that fell from a shelf and did not break, which Lena had been standing directly beneath. A dog in the park that should have been frightened of a 5-year-old reaching for it, but instead went immediately still and pressed its nose into her palm. The way Lena sometimes answered questions before they were asked, not always, not reliably, but often enough that Mara noticed. Mara noticed everything. It was how she had stayed safe. She had grown up in a normal family. 2 parents, 1 younger brother, a house in the Midlands with a small garden, and a gate that needed fixing. She had been perfectly ordinary, until she was 22, and met a man at a conference she had no particular reason to attend, had been dragged along by a friend who later bailed. The man had been standing near the window with a glass of water, not drinking it, just holding it, looking at the room the way someone looks at something they have seen 100 times and find no longer interesting. He was tall. He was quiet. He had the kind of face that did not ask for your attention but held it anyway. His name was Dominic. She had not known what he was, not at first. He had not told her right away. People like him did not lead with that information, and by the time she understood, she was already deep enough in that leaving felt impossible. Except that it had not been impossible. She had proved that. She had left in the middle of the night with a 2-year-old and a bag and whatever cash she had in her wallet, and she had built something from nothing in a gray town by the sea, and it was not a grand life, but it was hers, and it was safe, and that was what mattered. At least, that was what she told herself on the days when she believed it. On the days she did not. She sat in the kitchen after Lena was asleep, and listened to the sea outside, and tried not to think about the photograph inside the cookbook. She tried not to think about the way Dominic had looked at her the morning she had told him she needed a few days to visit her brother, the way his face had softened for just a moment, the way he had said, "Come back," not as a command, which she would have expected, but as something almost quiet. She had said she would. She had said it looking directly at him. Then she had gotten in the car and driven for 6 hours and never gone back. There were nights when that memory sat in her chest like a stone. She did not let herself feel sorry. Feeling sorry was a door she could not afford to open. She had made the decision she made for a reason, and the reason was sleeping in the next room with her amber eyes closed and her small hands curled under her chin, and that was enough. That had to be enough. The morning everything changed was a Thursday in October. It began like every other morning. Mara was up at 4, dressed, kettle on. She made tea she barely tasted, put on her coat, checked on Lena, who was still asleep in a tangle of blankets, with a stuffed rabbit under her arm. She stood in the doorway of that small room for a moment, watching the rise and fall of her daughter's breathing, and felt the particular kind of love that is mostly made of fear, and then she left. The walk to the bakery was 12 minutes through empty streets. The sea was loud that morning, closer sounding than usual. The sky was that deep, particular blue that comes just before the light changes, not dark and not light, somewhere between the two. Mara walked with her hands in her pockets and her eyes forward. She had almost reached the bakery when she felt it. It was not a sound, it was not a sight. It was something underneath those things, a pressure, a shift in the air, the way a room feels different when someone has just walked into it, even if you have not looked up yet. She had felt it before, years ago, so many times that the feeling had become ordinary, and then for 5 years she had not felt it at all, and she had forgotten how specific it was. She stopped walking. The street was empty. The lamp above the bakery door was still on, casting a pale yellow circle on the wet pavement. Nothing moved. The sea was loud. The sky was getting lighter at the edges. She stood there for a long moment, telling herself she was wrong. Then she turned around and went inside and started the bread, and she did not let herself think about it again until the first customer of the morning came in, and the bell above the door rang, and she looked up from the counter and saw that the street outside was empty in every direction except for one. A car was parked across the road. It had not been there when she arrived. She looked at it for exactly 2 seconds. Then she turned back to the register and smiled at the customer and said good morning and took their order and kept her face completely still. And when the customer left and the shop was empty again, she stood with both hands flat on the counter and breathed very carefully through her nose. She had been found. She did not know how. She did not know when it had happened, whether it had been recently or whether someone had known for longer than she thought. What she knew was this: that car had not been parked there by accident. Nothing about any of this was an accident. Her daughter was 2 streets away, asleep. The bread in the oven needed another 14 minutes. Mara closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then she opened them, untied her apron, and picked up her phone. The intelligence report had been filed on a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, it was on the desk of a man named Owen Carr, who was the head of the Northern PAC's Information Division, a quiet, careful man of 50, who had worked for Dominic Vale for 12 years, and had learned in that time to recognize which pieces of paper required immediate attention, and which could wait until after his coffee. This one he read standing up before he had even sat down. He read it twice. Then he walked down the hall to Dominic's office and knocked, which he rarely did without calling ahead. When the door opened, Dominic was already at the window with a file in his hand, which meant he had been up since before 6, which was not unusual. What was unusual was the way he looked at Owen when Owen held out the report. "I found her," Owen said. He did not specify who. He did not need to. There was only one her that had mattered for 5 years, only one absence that had shaped the entire atmosphere of the Northern PAC's leadership, in ways that nobody openly discussed, but everybody felt. The council had learned not to bring it up in meetings. The advisors had learned not to suggest replacements or alliances, or any arrangement that required Dominic to acknowledge a future he was not ready to look at. Dominic took the report. He read it without any visible change in his expression, which was normal. He read everything that way. But Owen watched his hands, because Owen was good at watching, and what his hands did was go very still. Not the stillness of a man who feels nothing, the stillness of a man who is holding something very carefully. There was a photograph clipped to the back of the report. A still, from a street camera, partially obscured, taken from some distance. It showed a woman, in a gray coat, walking along a wet pavement with her head down. Even at that angle, even at that distance, even after 5 years, there was no question. "She has the child with her," Owen said. He kept his voice flat, which was also normal. He had learned long ago that delivering information to Dominic Vale required a certain neutrality, because the man processed things best when the person delivering them did not add their own emotional weight to it. Dominic set the report down on the desk. He turned back to the window. Outside, the morning was gray and wet. The courtyard below was empty except for 2 members of the guard making their rounds along the far wall, distant enough to be silent from this height. The mountains beyond the compound were half hidden in low cloud. Owen waited. "How long have you known her location?" Dominic asked. "The report was filed Tuesday afternoon. I received it this morning." "And before Tuesday?" "Nothing confirmed. There were 2 possible sightings in the last 18 months, both inconclusive. The team didn't pursue them without a direct order." Dominic was quiet for a moment, then, "You didn't bring me those sightings." "No," Owen said. "You told me 4 years ago that you did not want possible sightings. You wanted confirmation or nothing." That was true. Dominic had said exactly that. He had said it in the kind of tone that ends a conversation, and Owen had respected it, and so the possible sightings had gone into a file that sat in a drawer, and now there was a confirmed location, and a photograph of a woman in a gray coat, and a mention of a child, and Dominic was standing at the window with his hands very still. "The child's name," Dominic said. "Lena. No surname registered consistently. The mother is living under the name Mara Ellis." There was a pause. Something moved across Dominic's face, barely perceptible, there and gone. "Ellis," he said. "Yes." He said nothing else for a moment. Owen stood and waited with the patience of a man who had learned that waiting was sometimes the most useful thing he could do. The fire in the corner of the office made a sound. The wind against the windows made a sound. Otherwise, the room was very still. "I'm going alone," Dominic said. Owen had expected this. He had spent the drive in that morning preparing his objections, listing them in his head, ordering them by urgency. Now he looked at Dominic's back and made a decision not to deliver any of them. "All right," he said. "I don't want anyone following me. I don't want a convoy. I don't want anyone in that town except me." "Understood. And this report does not leave this room. Not the council. Not the advisors. Not anyone." Owen nodded. That too he had expected. There were members of the council who would have opinions about the confirmed location of the woman who had left the Alpha King in the middle of the night 5 years ago, and those opinions would be complicated, and loud, and entirely unwelcome. Dominic had never given anyone the full story of what had happened. People had guessed, people had talked among themselves, the way they always did, but the actual facts were known to very few, and Dominic intended to keep it that way. He picked up the photograph again. He looked at it for a moment. "She looks well," he said, quietly, almost to himself. Owen left him there. For the rest of that day, and all of the next, Dominic did the things he was supposed to do. He attended the morning briefing. He reviewed the northern boundary agreements. He signed the letters that needed signing. He ate lunch at his desk and said nothing that was not necessary, and did not look out of place to anyone watching, because he had spent years learning how not to look out of place. But he was already somewhere else. He was already in a gray town by the sea, standing in a wet street outside a bakery, trying to figure out what he was going to say to the woman he had been looking for, without admitting he was looking for her, for 5 years. He left on a Friday morning before anyone in the compound was awake. He drove himself. He took the long road, the one that went through small towns and empty countryside rather than the motorway, and he drove steadily, and did not stop except once, for petrol, and a terrible cup of coffee from a machine at a service station. The country changed around him as he drove, flatter and grayer, the sky pressing lower, and eventually, he could smell the sea before he could see it. He had not slept the night before. He had sat in the chair in his room, and held the photograph, and tried to think clearly, which was difficult, because the part of him that was used to thinking clearly kept being interrupted by the part of him that was not. He had not let himself think about this for 5 years. He had managed it the way you manage any pain you cannot fix, by staying busy, by keeping it in a compartment, by refusing to open the door. He had told himself she had left because she wanted to leave, that whatever reason she had, it was hers to keep, that chasing someone who wanted to be gone was not something he was willing to do. But there was a child. There was a child he had never met, a child who was 5 years old and living in a town called Greyport under a made-up name. And whatever he had told himself about respecting distance and not chasing people, that was the fact he could not manage. That was the fact that had been sitting in the compartment with everything else, getting heavier, and now it was out and it was in the car with him, and there was nowhere to put it. He arrived in Greyport at 2:30 in the afternoon. The town was exactly as gray as it sounded. Narrow streets, old houses, the sea audible from nearly everywhere. He drove slowly through the center, past a small market, past a post office, past a pub with its lights already on, even though it was not yet dark. He turned onto Callow Street and drove to the end, and sat for a moment looking at the bakery on the corner. It was closed by this hour. A sign in the window said the hours, 6 to 12. There was a light on inside, but dim, the kind of light you leave on so the place doesn't feel empty. He parked the car and sat in it. He did not know what he had expected to feel, arriving here. He had not let himself imagine it too clearly on the drive down, because imagining it meant deciding what he wanted from this, and he had not been able to do that. Now he was here and the bakery was closed, and the street was quiet, and the sea was making its sound somewhere nearby, and what he felt was something he did not have a word for, something between relief and dread, something that belonged to both. He sat in the car for a long time. When he finally got out, the air was cold and wet and tasted like salt. He put his hands in his coat pockets and stood on the pavement and looked at the closed bakery, and then he looked up and down the street, and then he did something that did not come naturally to him. He waited. He did not know if she had seen him arrive. He did not know if she was watching from somewhere. He stood on the pavement outside the bakery on Callow Street in Greyport on a gray Friday afternoon, and simply stood there, without a plan, without a strategy, without any of the careful structures he usually built around himself when he was in an uncertain situation. He stood there because he did not know what else to do. After about 20 minutes, he saw movement in the window of the shop next to the bakery, a curtain shifting. He kept his eyes forward. After another few minutes, he heard a door open somewhere along the street behind him. He did not turn around. He heard footsteps, slow, deliberate. They stopped about 3 meters away. He turned. She was wearing a gray coat, the same one from the photograph. Her hair was shorter than he remembered. She looked at him with an expression that was completely controlled, no fear visible, no anger visible, nothing but a kind of watchful stillness that he recognized because he had taught it to himself, and she had learned it from being around him. They stood like that for a moment, just looking at each other, 5 years collapsing into a single second. He did not move toward her. She did not move toward him. The sea made its sound. The wind pushed between them. "I just want to understand," he said. Her jaw tightened, just slightly. It was the only thing that moved. The thing about Lena that Mara understood better than anyone was that the child saw everything. She was not loud about it. She did not call attention to it the way some children did, the ones who said, "I notice you're sad," and waited for a response. Lena was quiet about her observations. She filed them away. She returned to them later, sometimes days later, and asked a single, precise question that made it clear she had been thinking about it the whole time. She was 5 years old and she had her father's eyes and her mother's silences, and between those two things she had become a small person of extraordinary stillness, who watched the world with the patience of someone much older. She had 3 questions she came back to regularly. Mara knew all 3 by heart. She had prepared answers to each, answers that were honest enough to satisfy a 5-year-old, but vague enough to leave no door open that she could not close again. She had delivered those answers many times. She had thought she was doing well at them. Then Lena started asking a 4th question, and Mara had no prepared answer for it. The 4th question was about the big house in the mountains. Lena had not seen it. She had no reason to remember it. She had been 2 years old when they left, and everything from that time was lost to her in the soft blur of early childhood. But she had begun talking about a house, a big house. She said it was made of stone. She said it was very high up and very cold, and that there was a fire that you could stand in front of and feel warm all the way through. Mara had asked her, very carefully, where she had heard about a house like that. Lena had looked at her with those amber eyes and said, "I didn't hear about it. I just know." Mara had not slept well for a week after that. She told herself it was nothing. Children invented things. Children had vivid imaginations. Lena was a bright child in particular, the kind of bright that made things up so completely they seemed real. There was no reason to read anything unusual into a 5-year-old describing a house she had never been to. She told herself this, and she almost believed it. The daycare Lena attended was run by a woman named Patrice, who had the warm, unhurried manner of someone who genuinely liked small children, which was rarer than it should have been. Lena liked Patrice. She was comfortable there. She had 2 friends, a boy called George, who was loud and cheerful and collected rocks, and a girl called Nella, who was serious and did not say much, but sat very close to Lena during story time. Mara liked knowing Lena had those 2. It was another thing she had built, small, steady, good. On the Thursday before everything changed, Mara had picked Lena up from the daycare as usual. They had walked home through the market, and Lena had asked if they could have soup for dinner, and Mara had said yes, and they had bought vegetables at a stall run by an old man named Arthur, who always gave Lena a carrot to eat on the way home. Lena ate the carrot and held Mara's hand, and they walked without saying much, which was comfortable between them. They were both people who did not need to fill silence. At dinner, Lena had asked, out of nowhere and completely without warning, about the photograph. "There's a picture in your cookbook," she said. "I saw it when you were looking for the bread recipe." Mara set down her spoon. "When did I look for a bread recipe?" "2 weeks ago on Saturday. You got the book down and then you didn't find the recipe and you put it back. But when you put it back, the picture fell a little bit out and I could see the corner of it." Mara looked at her daughter. "You've been waiting 2 weeks to ask about it." Lena nodded. This did not surprise Mara at all. "It's a photograph of some people I used to know," Mara said. "Is the man in it my father?" The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the sea was making its evening sound. "What makes you ask that?" Mara said. She was proud of how steady her voice came out. Lena considered this. She poked at her soup with the spoon. "Because the corner I could see showed a tall man, and he had the same eyes as me." Mara breathed. In, out. She picked up her spoon again. "You saw all that from a corner of a photograph." "It was a pretty big corner," Lena said, completely seriously. Mara had smiled at that, despite herself. "Yes," she said, after a moment. "The man in the photograph is your father." Lena nodded, as though this confirmed something she had already decided. She went back to her soup. Then, after a few spoonfuls, "What is he like?" This was the question Mara had no prepared answer for. She had thought about it, many times, but she had never landed on a version that felt both honest and safe. She had thought about saying he was a good man, but that was complicated. She had thought about saying he was far away, but that sounded like a door being closed, and she did not want Lena to feel that. She had thought about saying nothing and steering the conversation elsewhere, but Lena would simply wait and ask again in 2 weeks. "He is very capable," she said finally. "He is someone who can handle very difficult things. He doesn't show much on the outside, but that doesn't mean nothing is happening on the inside." Lena thought about this for a while. Then she said, "That sounds like you." Mara did not answer. After Lena was in bed, Mara sat in the kitchen for a long time. She did not get up. She did not make tea. She just sat with her hands in her lap, and the sea outside, and the thin sound of the wind through the gap in the window frame, and she thought about the conversation and what it meant. Lena was getting older. The questions were getting more specific. The things Lena was noticing about herself, the small differences, the ways she was not quite the same as George or Nella or the other children at the daycare, those were only going to become more noticeable as time went on. And every question that came would push Mara further toward the conversation she had been building defenses against for 3 years. She thought about what she had said to the old woman at the charity sale when she bought the cookbook. She had been there with a younger Lena on her hip, browsing tables of donated things, and the old woman had said, "Oh, that's a wonderful book. My daughter bought it for herself when she moved away and was trying to make the best of things." Mara had said, "That sounds exactly right," and paid 30 pence and carried it home and put the photograph inside it that same evening. The best of things. She had been doing that. She had genuinely been doing it. There was real good in their life here. Real warmth, real safety. She did not want to give it up. She did not want anything to touch it. But Lena was 5 now, and she had seen the corner of a photograph and identified her father's eyes in it, and she had waited 2 weeks to ask the question, and when she asked it she had been entirely calm, and that calmness was the thing that made Mara feel most clearly that she was running out of time. She thought about Dominic. She rarely let herself do this. When she did, she tried to keep it factual. What she knew about him. Not what she had felt. Not the early months before she understood what she was in the middle of. Not the moments that still surfaced sometimes in the early hours, before she was awake enough to stop them. Just the facts. He was a man who had built his authority over many years. He was not cruel, which people often assumed about men in his position. He was exacting. He had standards that very few people met, and he did not pretend otherwise. He was capable of great loyalty, and he expected it in return, and when it was broken, which it rarely was, he went very quiet in a way that was more frightening than shouting. He had never been unkind to her. She wanted to be precise about that, because it was important, and because there was a version of her story that people might construct in which she had left because of something he had done, and that was not true. He had not been unkind. He had not done anything that she would have called wrong. What she had heard, in a meeting she was not supposed to be in, was about the people around him, the people who served him, the people who had decided without asking him that certain outcomes for their child would be inconvenient, and were quietly discussing how to manage those outcomes before they became a problem. She did not know, even now, whether Dominic had been aware of that conversation. She had not stayed to find out. She had made a decision in the space of 40 minutes, standing in a corridor with her back against a wall and her heart in her mouth, and she had acted on it before she could talk herself out of it, and she had never looked back. But she was looking back now. She sat in the kitchen and looked back, and she thought about what Lena had said at dinner, that her description of Dominic sounded like Mara herself, and she thought about the fact that Lena had his eyes and her patience, and that combination was going to make her into someone remarkable if she was given the space to grow into herself. And that was all Mara had ever wanted. Space, safety, room to be remarkable, without anyone deciding in advance what shape remarkable was allowed to take. She finally got up and went to the bookshelf. She stood in front of it for a moment. Then she reached up and took down the cookbook. She did not open it. She just held it. Then she put it back and went to bed, and she did not sleep. And in the morning she got up at 4 and put her coat on, and walked to the bakery, and felt the shift in the air halfway down the street, and stood still for a moment before she kept walking. The kitchen table in Mara's rented house was small. It seated 2 comfortably, 3 if the third person did not mind being close to the wall. It was a plain wooden table, with a scratch along one edge, that had been there when she moved in. She had eaten every meal at it for 5 years. She had paid bills at it, read to Lena at it, sat alone at it in the dark after her daughter was asleep. She had never sat across it from Dominic Vale. He sat with his hands folded on the table, and his coat still on. He had not asked to take the coat off. She had not offered. The space between them was careful, which was the right word for it. Not tense but not relaxed. Held in a way that required effort from both of them. Lena was at Patrice's. Mara had called Patrice that morning from the bakery, before she had fully decided what she was doing, and had asked if Lena could stay later tonight, and Patrice had said of course, she was welcome until 8. Mara had thanked her and hung up and stood behind the counter for a moment, and then she had finished her shift and come home, and sat in the kitchen for 2 hours before she heard the knock at the door. She had opened it, and looked at him and said, without any greeting, "Come in." He had. Now they were here. The table between them, the window dark, the sea outside making its sound. She had been thinking, on and off since that morning outside the bakery, about how to begin. She had run through several versions. She could start with the facts, the things she had heard, the words, the specific phrases she had memorized in that corridor 5 years ago because she knew she would need them. She could start at the beginning, with what it had been like to be in that world, to be brought into it, to slowly understand its shape. She could start with Lena, with the questions Lena was already asking, with the fact that time was running out and something was going to have to be said. In the end, she started with none of those things. "You didn't bring anyone with you," she said. "No." That was deliberate. "Yes." She looked at him. He looked back. He had the same face. She had been braced for him to look different, older, or harder, or changed in some way that would make this easier, but he looked the same. That was not easier. "How did you find me?" she asked. "Intelligence report. Street camera footage. It took longer than it should have, which I take to mean you were careful." "I was." He nodded slightly. "I know." There was a pause. She wrapped her hands around her mug. The tea had gone cold, but she kept holding it. "You said you wanted to understand," she said. "I want to be clear about something before I tell you anything. I am not telling you this because I want to come back. I am not telling you this because I want anything from you. I am telling you because my daughter is 5 years old, and she is already asking questions I cannot answer much longer, and if I am going to tell her anything, I need to know first whether the thing I was afraid of was real." Dominic said nothing. He watched her. "The night I left," she said, "I had gone to bed early. Lena was asleep. I woke up around midnight, and I was looking for a glass of water, and I took the wrong corridor." She paused. "I ended up outside the West meeting room. The door was not fully closed. There were 4 voices inside." She stopped. He was very still. She told him what she had heard. She told him in the same flat, measured tone she had used to deliver the decision to leave, the way she had run it through her head so many times in 5 years that it had worn smooth. She told him about the words, weak lineage. She told him about the phrase, managed before it becomes a problem. She told him about the voice that had said, very calmly, that there were ways to handle these things that did not require involving the alpha himself, that it would be cleaner that way. She told him all of it. She watched his face as she did. She watched it the way she watched most things, carefully, without showing that she was watching. He did not interrupt. He did not change expression in any obvious way. But about halfway through, his hands, which had been flat and still on the table, shifted. He laced his fingers together. She saw the knuckles. When she finished, the room was silent except for the sea. She waited. He said, very quietly, who was in the room. She had memorized the voices. She had always been good with voices. She had 4 names. She gave them to him. He was quiet for a long time after that, the kind of quiet that she associated with him, the kind that was not emptiness but the opposite, too much happening inside for anything to come out. She sat and let it be quiet. She was not afraid of silence. Then he said, "You heard them planning to harm Lena." "I heard them discussing contingencies," she said. "I heard them saying it would be cleaner to handle it without you knowing. I heard them say it in the tone of men who had thought about it before." She looked at him steadily. "I had 40 minutes between that corridor and the moment I had to make a decision. I had no proof. I had no allies. I had 1 bag and a sleeping toddler and whatever money was in my wallet." "So you ran." I protected my child, she said. That is not the same as running. He looked at her. Something moved in his face that she did not have a name for. It was not anger. It was not quite pain. It was something more fundamental than both. I thought you left because of me, he said. She held his gaze. I know. For 5 years I thought. I know what you thought, she said. And I'm sorry that I left you with that. I am genuinely sorry. But I want you to hear what I'm telling you. I did not leave because of you. I left because of the people around you, and because I did not know, and I still do not know, how much of what they were planning you were aware of. The question landed between them. She had been carrying it for 5 years. She had wondered about it in the dark, in the bakery before dawn, in the corridor outside Lena's room. She had thought about it from every angle, and never been able to answer it, because the only way to answer it was to ask him, and asking him meant being in the same room as him, and being in the same room as him meant this. He looked at her across the table. I did not know, he said. She studied him. She was very good at knowing when someone was lying. It was a thing she had built over years, not a gift but a skill, the way all useful things are built. She looked at him now, and she looked carefully. I believe you, she said. He let out a breath. It was not a dramatic exhale, just a small release, barely visible, but she caught it. That does not fix everything, she said immediately. It does not mean it was safe. Whether you knew or not, those men were in your inner circle, and they were having that conversation without you, and that means something about the world I would have been bringing Lena up in. Yes, he said, it does. She was slightly surprised that he agreed so quickly. She had expected more, not defensiveness exactly, but the natural resistance of someone who had built something and did not want to hear that parts of it were rotten. He had not done that. He had just agreed. What do you want? He said. Not from me personally. What do you actually want, for Lena? It was the right question. She had not expected it to be the first question, but it was the right one, and it told her something. I want her to be safe, she said. Not in theory. Actually safe. I want the people who were in that room to have no authority over her future. I want her protected in a way that does not depend on anyone's goodwill or political calculation. I want her to be able to be exactly who she is, without anyone deciding that what she is represents a problem to be managed. She said all of this looking directly at him. She said it without raising her voice, without any emotion that she had not chosen to let through. She said it the way she said everything, carefully, precisely, meaning every word. He listened to the whole thing. Then he said, I can do that. She looked at him. Can you? Or are you saying you can because you want me to trust you? Both, he said. But I can. And I will. She said nothing for a moment. The tea in the mug was cold and she was still holding it. Outside, the sea was very loud tonight, as though it had something to say. There is something else, she said. He waited. Lena asked me about you last week, she said. She saw the corner of a photograph, and she identified you by your eyes. She has been thinking about you. She paused. She asked me what you were like, and I told her you were capable, and that you don't show much on the outside. He was quiet. She said that sounded like me, Mara said. For the first time since he had sat down, something crossed his face that was entirely unguarded. It was there for only a second, and then it was gone, but she saw it, and she held it in her mind, because it was the most honest thing she had seen from him in a very long time. She wants to meet you, Mara said. Or she will, soon. She hasn't asked directly yet, but it's coming. He looked at her. What will you say when she asks? Mara was quiet for a moment. She set the cold mug down. I don't know yet, she said, but I'm sitting here, and that's more than I thought I would ever do. He nodded once, slowly. The night stretched out around them. The sea kept going. The table between them was still scratched along one edge, still the same plain wood, and nothing about the room had changed. But something in the air was different now, not resolved, not fixed, just different. The weight of 5 years of silence had shifted, not lifted, but moved, redistributed, and they were both sitting under the new shape of it, figuring out what it meant. Neither of them said anything for a while. That was fine. They were both, as it turned out, people who did not need to fill silence. The drive back to the Northern Pax compound took Dominic 7 hours. He did not stop. He barely noticed the road changing around him. He drove with both hands on the wheel, and the window cracked slightly, so the cold air came in and kept him sharp, and he thought about the names Mara had given him. 4 names. 4 voices in a room that should have been empty, discussing what to do about a child they considered an inconvenience. He had known all 4 men for years. One of them had served the pack since before Dominic had taken over. One of them had been at his right hand during the boundary expansion. One of them had given a speech at the pack gathering 3 years ago about loyalty and the importance of protecting the Alpha's line. He rolled that last one around in his head as he drove. Protecting the Alpha's line. He had sat across that small table from Mara and told her he had not known about the meeting, and that was the truth. He had not known. But that was not the thing he was sitting with now. The thing he was sitting with was this. He should have known. A man does not run a structure built on loyalty and fail to know what is being said in rooms he is not in. A man does not call himself a leader and then be genuinely surprised to learn that the people closest to him have been quietly making plans about his family without him. He had been surprised. That was the part that kept landing on him as he drove through the dark. Not rage, not grief, though both of those were there somewhere underneath. The surprise. Because if he had been surprised, then he had not been paying attention in the right way, and if he had not been paying attention, then the world he had built was more opaque to him than he had believed, and that had consequences for everything, not just for Mara and Lena, but for every decision he had made in the last 5 years with those 4 men in the room. He arrived back at the compound before the sun came up. He did not go to his room. He went directly to his office and sat at the desk and took a piece of paper and wrote 4 names on it. He looked at the names for a few minutes. Then he put the paper in the desk drawer and went to wash his face and change his coat and came back. He called Owen at 6 in the morning. Owen answered immediately, which suggested he had not been asleep. "I need you to pull the complete record of the Western meeting room from 5 years ago," Dominic said. "Specifically, any meetings held in the 6 weeks before my—" He paused. "Before she left, I want the attendance records, the agenda notes, everything logged. Is there something specific you are looking for?" Owen said. "I'll know it when I find it," Dominic said. "Get me the records." "By this afternoon," Owen said, and hung up. Dominic put the phone down and looked at the wall. He was very tired, but he was not going to sleep, not yet. He had things to do, and he needed to be clear-headed for them, which meant he needed to feel what he was feeling right now, so it did not come up later at a bad moment. He had learned that long ago, that feelings postponed did not disappear. They simply waited. So he sat and felt it. He felt the weight of 5 years of believing something that was not true, or not completely true. He had believed she had left because she did not want the life. He had told himself that was her choice and he had to respect it, and on the good days he had believed that, and on the bad days he had told himself it again until it stuck. He had never once imagined that she had left not from him but toward something, toward safety, toward a life where his inner circle could not quietly decide her daughter's fate. He thought about Lena. He had been thinking about Lena since the photograph, in a way he had not let himself for 5 years. He had a daughter who was 5 years old and had amber eyes and lived in a gray town by the sea and had identified him from the corner of a photograph, a daughter who had been asking questions since she was old enough to ask them. He thought about what Mara had said. She told her he was capable and that he didn't show much on the outside. He thought about a small child turning that information over in her mind and saying, "That sounds like you," to her mother. He thought about what it meant that Lena had already drawn a line between his face in a photograph and her own eyes in a mirror. The records arrived from Owen at noon. He spent the afternoon going through them. It took about 2 hours to find what he was looking for. A meeting marked in the log as informal consultation. No agenda, no minutes. Attendance recorded as 4 names. The same 4 names Mara had given him. He sat with that for a while. Then he called his legal counsel, a careful, efficient woman named Patricia, who had been with the organization for 8 years, and had the particular quality of never asking more than she needed to. He told her he needed to schedule an open court session for the following Monday. He told her the subject was an internal matter of PAC law and leadership structure. He told her it was not optional, and that all senior council members were required to attend. Patricia asked, with her customary brevity, whether she should prepare documentation. "Yes," he said. "I'll send you what I need by tonight." He spent the rest of the day writing. He wrote carefully, because this mattered, and he did not want to do it wrong. He wrote the account of what Mara had told him, without naming her or identifying where she had been or where she was now. He wrote about the meeting room, the date, the four voices. He wrote about the phrase weaker lineage. He wrote about the words cleaner without the alpha's involvement. He wrote without anger in the text, because this was not the place for anger. Anger was for later, for the private room he would go to after this was finished and the door was closed. Here, in these documents, there was only the record. What happened, what was said, what it meant for the structure of the organization, and the safety of those under its protection. He also wrote something else. He wrote it separately, on a plain sheet of paper, in his own handwriting rather than typed. It was the formal acknowledgement of Lena as his daughter and heir, with full legal standing under PAC law, and the full set of protections that came with that standing. He wrote it clearly. He wrote it without conditions. Then he looked at it for a long time. He did not know if Mara would accept it. He did not know if she would see it as the thing it was, which was a line drawn around their daughter, or whether she would see it as a move, as strategy, as him reaching for something he was not entitled to reach for. He thought about calling her. He thought about sending it to her first, asking permission. He decided against both. He decided this because he had been asked one question, across that small kitchen table, in a voice that was carefully controlled but carried something underneath it, that had been pressing for 5 years. She had asked whether the thing she feared was real, and whether he had known. He had told her he had not. He had told her he could protect Lena. This was him keeping that word. He did not need her approval to protect his daughter. He did not need anyone's approval. He had the authority, and he had the documentation, and he had the legal structure, and now he was going to use it, and when it was done, he was going to send Mara a copy, and tell her that it was done, and that he did not expect her to come back. That was all. He put the document with the others and sent everything to Patricia, and went to bed. He lay in the dark for a long time. He thought about the sea. He thought about the sound of it outside a small rented house in Greyport. He thought about a woman with dark hair and watchful eyes, sitting across a plain wooden table, with her hands around a cold mug of tea, telling him a story that rearranged 5 years of certainty in the space of about 20 minutes. He thought about what she had said at the end. I don't know yet, but I'm sitting here. It was not a promise. He understood that. It was not an offer of anything. It was simply an observation. She was sitting there, and that was more than she had been willing to do before, and he was going to be careful with that. He was not going to pick it up and run with it. He was not going to build anything on top of it without her consent. He was going to do what he could do, which was make things safer, and he was going to do it without asking her for anything in return. He closed his eyes. The Monday morning open court session was not unusual as a format. Dominic called them several times a year, formal assemblies where the entire senior structure of the PAC gathered in the main hall, where decisions were announced, and grievances were heard, and the record was updated. The difference this Monday was the atmosphere in the hall before he walked in. People had heard things. People always heard things. By Sunday evening, there was a quiet restlessness moving through the compound, the particular unease of an organization that suspects something is coming, but cannot identify it precisely. Conversations happened in corridors, and then stopped when the wrong person walked by. Owen, who moved through the compound with the invisibility of a man who had been there long enough to become part of the furniture, reported to Dominic that morning that the 4 council members in question had each independently tried to request a private meeting with him over the weekend. He had declined all 4. He walked into the main hall at 9 o'clock exactly. The full senior council was assembled, 52 people arranged in the curved rows of seats that faced the raised floor at the front. Advisors, regional leads, legal staff, the heads of the various divisions. It was a full room. He stood at the front and let the quiet settle completely before he began. He did not use notes. He knew what he was going to say. He began with the facts. He described the meeting, the date, the 4 attendees. He described what had been discussed in that meeting. He used plain language. He did not editorialize. He described the words that had been used about a child who was a member of the Alpha's line, and he let those words sit in the room for a moment, before he continued. The room was completely still. He looked at the 4 men as he spoke. They were seated in different parts of the hall. 2 of them were watching him. One was looking at the floor. One had his face arranged in an expression of neutral attention that was slightly too controlled to be genuine. He described the consequences of that meeting. The consequence was that the woman who had been in that corridor had left, and had been gone for 5 years with his daughter. He said this plainly. He did not frame it as her fault, or their fault, or anyone's fault in particular. He said, "This is what happened, and this is the direct result of what was said in that room." Then he said, "2 members of this council held senior positions and participated in a conversation that involved planning an action against a member of the Alpha's line without his knowledge or authorization. That is a breach of the most fundamental obligation of a council member. It is not a matter of judgment or interpretation. It is a clear violation." He stripped them of their positions there, in the hall, in front of everyone. He did it in the same tone he had used for the rest of the address. No shouting, no visible fury, just the pronouncement, delivered clearly, the decision made and stated. The 2 most senior of the 4 he removed from the council entirely. The other 2 he removed from their current roles pending a formal review. He did not go into further detail about consequences beyond that. People in the room understood that the detail would come separately. The silence in the hall was very complete. Then he did the second thing. He formally acknowledged Lena on the record, her name, her age, her standing as his daughter and heir, with full legal protections under PAC law. He stated that the documentation was filed, that it carried immediate effect, and that any challenge to her standing, or her safety, would be treated as a challenge to the Alpha's authority directly. He said this last part looking at the room in general, not at any person in particular, but everyone understood who it was directed at. He closed the session. He walked out of the hall and down the corridor to his office and closed the door. He sat down. He stayed there for about 10 minutes, which was the amount of time he allowed himself, before he picked up the phone and called Patricia and asked her to prepare the documents for dispatch. He wanted Mara to have them by the end of the week. He called Owen next. "Arrange for a courier. Personal delivery to the address I'll send you. The package should be delivered to her directly, not left at the door." Owen said, "Understood." Dominic put the phone down and looked out the window at the courtyard. The morning was clear. The mountains were visible today, sharp and cold and enormous. He had stood at this window many times over the years. He had made many decisions here. He had built things here, dismantled things, sat with difficult facts here until they became manageable. He felt something now that was different from anything he had sat with in this office before. Not victory, nothing like that, not even relief exactly. More like the particular feeling of having made a decision that you will not want to take back. The kind of decision that costs something but is correct, and the cost and the correctness are both present at the same time, and neither one cancels the other out. He had told her he could do it. He had done it. What came next was not up to him, and he had made his peace with that, or he was working on making his peace with it, which was the honest version. He pulled out a plain sheet of paper and picked up a pen. He wrote her name at the top. Not Elena, which was what he had called her. Mara, which was what she had told him she was now. He was not sure what he wanted to say. He wrote several things and crossed them out. He was not someone who crossed things out often. He did not like the appearance of uncertainty in writing. But this did not feel like a moment for a clean first draft. He wrote, "Eventually, the enclosed documentation is complete and effective immediately. I have not put your name in the court record, or disclosed your location to anyone. Lena's standing is protected regardless of any other considerations. There are no conditions attached to this. I do not expect anything in return." He stopped there. He looked at it. He wrote one more line, "I'm glad you told me." He folded the letter, put it with the documents, and sealed the envelope and gave it to Owen. Then he went back to work, and he did not let himself think about the sea. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday. It was delivered to the bakery, not the house, which was the right decision, though Mara did not stop to think about how it meant he had been careful enough to consider where she would prefer to receive it. A quiet man on a bicycle knocked on the bakery door at 8:30 in the morning, when Mara was the only one there, and handed her the envelope and left, without asking her to sign anything, or waiting for a response. She stood at the counter holding it for about 2 minutes. Then she put it in her bag and went back to the bread. She did not open it until Lena was in bed that night. She sat at the kitchen table and opened the envelope and read the letter first, which was short. Then she read the legal documents, which were long. She read them carefully, all the way through, because she was someone who read everything carefully. She read the acknowledgement of Lena's name, and standing, and the protections, and the conditions, which were none. She read the legal language, which was dense but clear. She read it all, twice. Then she sat back and looked at the wall for a while. She had not believed he would do it this quickly. She had not believed he would do it at all, if she was being honest with herself, or at least not without some negotiation, some arrangement that required her to give something in return. She had been prepared for that conversation. She had had it rehearsed. There was no conversation required. He had done what he said he would do. She picked up the letter again and read the last line. "I'm glad you told me." She read it several times. It was not a long line. It did not ask for anything. It did not attach itself to anything. It was just a statement of something true, delivered plainly, in the handwriting she recognized. She put the letter down and looked at the window. The sea was loud tonight. It often was on Wednesday evenings, she had noticed over the years, though she had never worked out why the sea would be louder on one day than another. The wind, probably. Something about the direction. She thought about the open court session. He had not mentioned it in the letter, but it was referenced in the documentation, a formal assembly, a date. She would be able to find out what had happened from that if she looked. She was not sure whether she wanted to look. Not yet. She thought about the 4 names she had given him. She thought about saying them out loud across that kitchen table. The words she had carried for 5 years, and never said to anyone. Not to Edna, not to Patrice, not to old Arthur with his carrots at the market stall. She had carried them alone, because that was the only safe way to carry them. And then she had said them out loud, and he had gone very still, and then he had come back and done what she had asked. She was sitting with that. She did not know what to do with it. There was a part of her that was waiting for the catch. She was not ashamed of that. She had learned to wait for catches. Life had taught her that things that look clean often are not, and she had learned to look at the back of things, the part that was not presented first. She was looking now. She could not find the catch. Everything in those documents was exactly what it claimed to be. She picked up the phone. She did not call Dominic. She called Edna. Edna answered on the second ring and said, "Bit late for you, isn't it?" Which was true. It was past 10. "I need to ask you something," Mara said, "and it's going to sound strange." "Most of what you say sounds a bit strange," Edna said, which was also not entirely untrue. "Go on." "If I needed to take some time," Mara said. "Not long. A week or 2. Could you manage the morning shift without me?" There was a pause. Then Edna said, "I've been managing morning shifts since before you were born, love." "I know. Is something happening?" Mara looked at the documents on the table. "Something is getting resolved," she said. Edna made the sound she made when she was deciding not to ask a follow-up question. "Take what you need. The bread won't miss you for 2 weeks." Mara thanked her and hung up. She sat for a while longer. Then she went to the bookshelf. She took down the cookbook. She opened it to the back cover and took out the photograph. She had not looked at it properly in 3 years. She looked at it now. It was a small photograph, taken outdoors somewhere high up, wind in both their hair. She looked younger than she felt. He looked, as he always did, as though he was holding something in, which she now understood differently than she had when the photograph was taken. She put the photograph on the table next to the legal documents. She looked at the 2 things together. The next morning she told Lena, while she was braiding her hair before daycare, that they might go on a small trip soon. Lena said, without looking up from the rabbit she was holding, "Are we going to see my father?" Mara's hands paused for just a moment in Lena's hair. "Maybe," she said. Lena nodded, as though she had been expecting this. "I'd like that," she said, and went back to the rabbit. Mara finished the braid and said nothing, but something in her chest, something that had been very tightly wound for a very long time, shifted slightly. Not released, not undone, just moved. She thought, maybe. The phone rang on a Thursday evening, 9 days after the envelope arrived. Dominic was in his office when it rang. He saw the number and picked up before the second ring, which was the first honest thing he had done in several weeks, because he had been practicing not appearing eager, and this was not that. "The documents are complete," Mara said. "No hello." She had never been someone who started with hello. "Yes," he said. "I read them twice. I assumed you would." There was a pause. Not uncomfortable. She said, "I want to say something, and I want you to hear all of it before you respond." "All right?" "I am not coming back," she said. "I want to be clear about that. Not as a threat. not as a negotiating position. I have a life here. I have built something here, and I am not going to set it aside, because the original situation has changed. My home is Greyport. My job is the bakery. My friends are Edna and Patrice and Arthur who sells vegetables, and those things matter, and I am not going to pretend they don't. I hear you, he said. But Lena asked me this morning if we were going to see you, she said. And I told her maybe. And I want to know, before I tell her anything more specific, what that would look like, what you are expecting, what you are not expecting. He had thought about this. He had thought about it carefully, which was the only way he knew how to think about anything. I'm not expecting anything, he said. I don't have a picture of what this should look like. I don't have a plan. If she comes here, I want to meet her. I want her to feel safe and comfortable. I want to answer whatever she wants to ask me. That's all. And if she comes here, Mara said, and then goes home again, and the next visit isn't for 6 months, that's something you can accept. Yes. And if it's awkward, and she doesn't like you straight away, then that's honest, he said. I'd rather she be honest than polite. Mara was quiet for a moment. She said something to me when I told her you were capable, she said. She said it sounded like me. You told me. I've been thinking about it since, she said. She has never met you. She has one corner of a photograph, and whatever she has picked up by osmosis, which is apparently quite a lot, and she has already decided that you and I are similar. A pause. I don't know what to do with that. Neither do I, he said. Another pause. Longer this time. The line was quiet except for the small sounds of the distance between them. We would come next Saturday, she said. One night. I want a place to stay that is not inside the compound. There is a town near you. I remember it. There is a hotel there. I'll arrange it, he said. She gets tired easily in the afternoon. Meetings should be in the morning. Understood. And I want to be present for all of it. I am not going to leave her alone with you. Not yet. I would not have asked you to, he said. She was quiet again. Then she said, all right, he said. There was a pause. She started, and then stopped. He waited. I don't know what I'm trying to say, she said. Which is unusual for me. I know, he said. You don't have to say it. She let out a small breath. Okay. They stayed on the line for a moment longer, neither of them saying anything, which was the most honest conversation they had had in 5 years. Then she said goodnight, and he said goodnight, and the line went quiet. He put the phone down and sat in the silence of the office. Outside, the compound was quiet at this hour. The mountains were out there in the dark, solid and enormous, the same as they had always been. He had grown up with those mountains. He had made decisions with them in the background for his entire adult life. He thought sometimes they were the most permanent thing he knew. But they had not moved, and he was moving. Slowly, carefully, without any certainty about where it went, but moving. He looked at the phone. He did not call her back to say anything else. She had said what she meant, and he had heard it, and she had made a decision, and he was not going to undermine it by adding to it. He was going to simply wait for Saturday. That was the right thing. He turned off the desk lamp and sat for a while in the dark. He thought about a small hotel in the town he knew, with its narrow streets and old buildings. He thought about Mara checking in, and Lena running her hand along the unfamiliar walls the way children do in new places. He thought about Saturday morning, and what it might look like to sit across a table from a 5-year-old who had amber eyes, and her mother's patience, and had already decided, from the corner of a photograph, that she knew something about him. He thought about what he would say. He did not know. For perhaps the first time in many years, he genuinely did not know, and he found that the not knowing was not the frightening thing he would have expected. It felt, strangely, like possibility. They arrived on a Saturday morning in November, when the sky above the northern mountains was pale and clear, and the cold came off the stone in the old town like something that lived there. Mara had driven through the night in shifts, stopping twice, with Lena sleeping in the back seat with the stuffed rabbit and a blanket. By the time they pulled into the car park behind the hotel, the sun was just coming up, orange and low, hitting the frost on the stone walls and turning it briefly gold. Lena had woken up 20 minutes from arrival, and was now sitting forward in her seat, looking out the window with great attention. It's cold, she observed. Yes, Mara said. How cold? Cold enough for a proper coat. Lena considered this. Then she said, "Is he coming here, or are we going there?" "He is coming here. To this hotel. For breakfast." Lena nodded. She looked out the window again. She said, "Is he nervous?" Mara pulled into the parking space and turned off the engine. She looked at her daughter in the rearview mirror, the small, serious face, the amber eyes catching the morning light. "I don't know," Mara said honestly. "Probably." "Are you?" A pause. "Yes." Lena looked at her. "Me too," she said. Then she picked up the rabbit and opened the car door and got out. The hotel was called Birch House. It was old and well kept, with a dining room that smelled of toast and coffee and wooden floors that creaked pleasantly underfoot. The woman at the desk gave them their key without any fuss and pointed them upstairs. Their room had 2 narrow beds and a window that looked out over the town's main street, quiet at this hour, with only a few early walkers and a dog at the end of a lead. Lena went directly to the window and looked out. Mara sat on the edge of the bed and checked her phone. Nothing. She put it away and watched her daughter at the window. "It's a nice town," Lena said. "It is. We could come back sometime, for a holiday." "Maybe," Mara said. At 8 o'clock, the hotel phone on the desk rang. Mara picked it up. The woman at the desk said there was a gentleman in the dining room asking for her. Mara said thank you, and hung up. She looked at Lena. "He's downstairs," she said. Lena turned from the window. She held the rabbit tighter for a moment. Then she set it carefully on the bed, as though leaving it somewhere safe, and straightened her coat. "Okay," she said. Mara took a breath. She took her daughter's hand, and they went downstairs. He was standing near the window at the far end of the dining room, not sitting, standing, with his coat still on and his hands in his pockets. He had arrived before them, which meant he had been early. She registered this without comment. He was looking out the window at the street in the same way Lena had looked from upstairs, and he did not hear them come in over the noise of the other breakfast guests. Lena stopped. Mara stopped beside her and let her daughter look. Lena looked at him for a long moment, then she looked up at Mara, then she looked back at him. "He's tall," she said quietly. "Yes." "Like in the photograph?" "Yes." Lena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with the particular calm she brought to everything, "His hands are in his pockets." "Yes. That means he doesn't know what to do with them." Mara looked down at her. "Where did you learn that?" "George does it," Lena said. "When he doesn't know what to do next, he puts his hands in his pockets." Mara said nothing. She looked across the room at Dominic, standing with his hands in his pockets and his back to them, looking at a street in a town he had driven a long way to reach, waiting. "Come on," she said. They walked across the room. He heard them when they were about halfway there and turned. He looked at Mara first, and then his eyes went to Lena, and something in his face changed completely. It was not what Mara had expected. She had expected something careful, something controlled, the face she had always known, the one that kept everything in. But what crossed his face when he looked at Lena was entirely uncontrolled, entirely unguarded, there and open before he could do anything about it, and he did not try to put it away. Lena looked at him with her amber eyes, his amber eyes. The match was so exact that even Mara, who had known it would be there, felt something move in her chest. He crouched down, not to be less imposing, or not only that. It looked more like the natural thing to do, like standing was the wrong height for this conversation. "Hello," he said. Lena looked at him seriously. Then she said, "You have my eyes." He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "I was going to say the same thing." Lena considered this. "Mine are newer," she said. He looked at her for a moment, and then he smiled. Not the small, restrained smile that Mara was used to seeing on the rare occasions she had seen him smile at all. A real one, wide and sudden and completely genuine, and it changed his whole face, and Lena looked at it with the expression of a scientist who has just confirmed a hypothesis. "Yes," he said. "Yours are much newer." Lena nodded. Then she said, "I brought my rabbit, but I left him upstairs. I can show him to you later if you like." "I would like that very much," he said. They sat down for breakfast, the 3 of them, at a table by the window, in the thin November light. The food came, toast and eggs and tea. Lena ate with the focused efficiency of a small person who takes meals seriously. She asked Dominic 3 questions during breakfast. Did he know how to bake bread? What was the coldest he had ever been? And whether the mountains near his home had names? He answered all three carefully and completely, as though they were the most important questions he had been asked in some time, which, Mara thought, watching him, they might have been. She did not say much during breakfast. She ate her toast and drank her tea and watched her daughter talk to her father, and she felt the strange, specific feeling of something being right that had been wrong for a very long time. Not fixed, not finished. There was too much history for either of those, but moving in a direction that was honest, that did not require her to hold anything back or protect anything she had not chosen to expose. After breakfast, Dominic walked with them through the town. Lena held his hand for part of it, which happened without announcement or ceremony. She simply reached up and took it as they turned a corner, the way children do when they have decided something. He did not make anything of it. He kept walking, and she kept walking beside him, and Mara walked on Lena's other side, and the three of them moved through the cold town in the thin November light. At one point, Lena stopped to look at a cat sitting on a windowsill. Dominic stopped beside her. Mara stopped behind them both and looked at the two of them, side by side, their heads tilted at the same angle, watching the cat in the same quiet, patient way. She thought about everything it had cost to get here. The 40 minutes in the corridor, the long drive in the dark with a 2-year-old, the 5 years of 4 in the morning, and the bakery, and the sea, and the systems that had held everything together. She thought about the photograph in the cookbook, and the cold mug of tea, and the table with the scratch, and the 4 names said out loud for the first time. She thought about Lena putting her rabbit on the bed, and saying okay, and taking her hand, and walking down the stairs. She was not ready to call this anything. She was not ready to name where it was going, or what it meant, or what the shape of it would be in a year, or 5 years, or 10. She was not someone who named things before she understood them. But she was standing on a street in a cold northern town, watching her daughter look at a cat with her father, and something in her chest was less tightly wound than it had been yesterday, and that was something. That was real. The cat on the windowsill looked at Lena. Lena looked back. Then the cat closed its eyes, and Lena smiled, and Dominic looked down at her, and said something quiet that made her smile wider, and Mara stood behind them both, and breathed, and the day was cold and clear, and the mountains were out there above the town, and the morning was still young. It was not a ending. It was something harder and more honest than that. It was a beginning, careful and uncertain, and entirely chosen, made of small things and long silences, and the particular courage of 2 people who were very good at protecting themselves, deciding, slowly, to try something else. And between them, holding a conversation with a cat on a windowsill, a 5-year-old with amber eyes who had decided all on her own that she was ready. That was enough. For now, that was more than enough.